since a lot of the money in social mobile games has usually been in casual games, which have a lot of female players, I would imagine a lot of you guys who are game developers have a perspective on it. Please don't feel that you cannot share it and not speak for women and whatnot, because the idea for sessions like this is basically sharing your learning experiences, and we all learn together, and there's no one's going to say, hey, you spoke for all women and you were very stereotypical or anything like that. So if that's the concern for why you're not sharing your perspective as game designers, please put that to rest.
Yeah. And I learned to get over the, hey, but you're not a woman. How can you design games? I learned to get over that within the first
So while you're shirt to make that work.
Yeah.
No, that's just the Australian in me.
So let me put the kind of, cliche, stereotypical, kind of like controversial thing up there. You put the cars and you put the doll houses together, and then you go and give a young girl and say, play, enjoy. And they end up with something like this, and put the cars there and put in the doll houses and make sure the cars are okay, and did you have a good day, are you okay, good night? And we laugh at it, but it tends to be true. And I feel like it's partly societal, but I think it's a lot of it is just inbuilt in biology. And let's talk a bit about, let's break that down. What does that specifically mean? So what I'm going to do is kind of list out just a list of what I'm kind of seeing as the main differences between how women like to play games and men. And again, this is broad strokes, and this does not apply for many groups within it, but just as a kind of a summary. So let's talk about the first one, which is like story and character context. Characters and story, I believe, are far more important to women than to men, especially in playing games. Emotional connection, the feeling of kind of empathy in both directions, like listening to and listening, are important. And I think that this is actually an opportunity for us because, a lot of games don't do they have a quest which will be like, oh, can you help me out? Oh, thank you very much, something like that. What about the other direction? I think there's plenty of opportunity to go in the other direction. If you look at the kind of the back and forth of like a conversation or how women support each other, it tends to be a lot of like backwards and forwards, helping each other. It's not just a one-way street all the time. So I think that is, it's definitely strong. Relationships are really important, and then the context and the resolution matters. Don't go and have a quest that doesn't give you an emotional reward at the end of it. Don't leave things hanging, right? It's bad form to go and like use an emotional hook to get you involved in the action, and then not give you a resolution at the end of that. So I know a lot of games like Dragon Age. Dragon Age is really popular amongst women. Alistair is like the most popular male NPC in a PC game currently. And you want to see some sort of resolution to him, not just kind of like, oh, what happened at the end. So, I mean, there's a small handful of companies who I think do this pretty well. So this is Pocket Jams, and it's like, we're lucky to be getting a great education here. I went to the local orphanage, and these kids don't even have a library, start the quest. So there's some sort of impact, right? Some emotional impact. I'd say many guys would just kind of click next. Let me just see the objectives, and let me achieve the objectives, and do it the best I possibly can, and come on top. And Heyday does this well as well. I mean, even just subtle kind of emotional things, like the little girl and the animation she makes as you kind of like, give her something. And this is an event that's running today, for example, and organic food is in style, you're going to go and, make sure you have that, and you'll get double bonuses and things like that. So context and story, I think, matter. And the companies that do the best tend to have, like, some sort of relationship, emotional element as part of it. So that's one. Now, it's difficult, okay? So this is I really like what these guys were trying to do. This is a startup based out of Canada. I think it's Silicon Sisters.
Yeah.
They did a game called School 26. And they really tried to say, okay, let's look at the teenage years. And the teenage years for girls is all about trying to navigate myself to the center of the social circle and feeling like comfortable and accepted and popular. It's popularity, it is high school, right? And so the way you do it is not through outright competition or like whatever, fighting. It's through social engineering, right? You go and engineer different things to happen, so you engineer your way to the middle of the social circle. It may be by helping people, it may be by bad-mouthing people behind their backs, it may be by whether you like the status update or not, or whether you give it a like on Instagram. I mean, there's various different ways, but it's all about social engineering, particularly in teenage years.
What's the game called?
School 26, yeah. And unfortunately, this game wasn't successful, but what it attempted was really good, and I kind of studied this game in a bit of depth. So they tried to have this kind of whole range of emotions, and you'd have scenarios and situations, and you would actually go and try to pick which one would be appropriate. I think the problem was it was too overwhelming for the players, and that's the challenge: is how do you go and get emotional depth and a range of emotions, and have some sort of freedom of choice without overwhelming the user. Like, it was just too much, too many choices. I felt really stressed. I'm like, I'm never going to get this right. And of course, you can't programmatically generate dialogue and conversation. Right? This is not Mass Effect. So very ambitious. The idea was right, but it's very hard to get right, which is why many people just don't even attempt it. However, I think there's room, and we need to kind of get further and further. I was saying to someone I was speaking to today, why are there no kind of like very kind of nuanced romantic comedies in games? There are in movies. Why not in games? Because it's kind of hard to do in an interactive space. People hate text as well. That's the thing. It's like they hate text, but they love range of emotions. So how do you convey it? Yeah. So anyway, there's a UI issue, there's a game design issue, but whoever solves it, I think will do really, really well. Okay, let's go on to number 2, which is the nurture mechanic. Yes, another cliche, but I believe it's very true, which is women as a whole tend to enjoy the process of nurturing and growing something more than guys would. They'd like to grow an army and then use it to destroy someone. Take care of pets, animals, characters. I'd say that the one example is like Pokemon.
So the desire to destroy is non-gender.
Sorry. I don't know. Some stories. I could share some stories. So the taking care is very important. So it's grow them. It's also defend them. And so both of those can be monetized and designed around for maximum fun and monetization. Are they happy? Are they healthy? If they are, I feel good in that process. And of course, Dragon Rail was probably the best example of that in the last couple of years. I did a really good job of that mechanic. And here's an example of how not to do it. Okay, this is kind of like social games 1.0 or 0.5, which is like, congratulations, you just got a new Chihuahua, and then one day later, it's like timer ticks in. Okay, time to show the message.
Abandoned.
Your Chihuahua is sick. Abandon or save. And it's just like, it's short-term thinking, right? I mean, players are smarter than that now. They've kind of evolved as well. Just like we've evolved, players have evolved. So you can't just go for the simplest thing. I know in China, for example, like they'd have like, Tencent, and they'd have their, virtual animal business and pet business. And it's like, the classic story, I'm short on my numbers this quarter. Hey guys, we need to go and have like, increase our numbers to hit the target. So suddenly, introduce a disease and an illness that kind of sweeps through the whole virtual land, and everyone has to pay more money, and they make the target in the short term. But you kind of abuse the trust of the players through that process. So nurturing is kind of a key one. So this is an example. This is Grace. This is actually my girlfriend. So this is a quote from her. I love taking care of my Sims. I love it. I check on them about 3 times a day. If my Nexus has battery, and I've been doing it for nearly 6 months, and I can say this is true because I see her all the time doing it. I love planning out who's doing what and making sure my kids in the game do great in the contests, and I can continue to build beautiful homes for all of them and expand out. And so she's totally free user. She's a hardcore free user of this game. She's never paid at all within free play, but she's got really, really far just by being very kind of careful to make sure she comes back every day multiple times. And this is her favorite game. My game is up there, but it's not at the top. So she enjoys the fashion game that we make. But I think that this nurturing mechanic is really strong in that. And if you go and look at, read up on the interviews behind the Sims and look at the original design intent, I mean, at its heart, Sims is essentially relationship building and home building. And yes, there's many other aspects and elements, but relationship is kind of one half of the equation. Now, Sims, I would argue, kind of like does a great job, but I think there's more that can be done. I mean, Sims is a fairly simple system in terms of how the relationships are done, but it's an incredibly deep and complex game. This is not a casual game. You know, people may think it's a casual game, but I think there's a lot of depth to it in how you play. Yeah, so that's the nurturing part. Let's talk about the next point, which is about art and details. Art really, really, really matters. There's a reason why it matters. I think that the pattern recognition, the appreciation for details, how women process, you know, even the visual cortex is different in women compared to men. This is just, you know, how we're wired. So that's why you see a lot of like visual matching games. Actually, for that matter, text and word matching is also stronger. And of course, the classic example is your hidden object game genre. Now, hidden object games, is it really a midcore game? I'm not really sure. Is it a mechanic that has a lot of strategy to it? Not really. I mean, you're kind of like just getting better and better at that same skill. There's not much depth in there. But some of the games are getting really interesting kind of hybrids, like combining the two genres together, like resource management and hidden object games. And I think the theme matters a lot. So we've debated internally about, should we make a 3D hidden object game? You know, should we, because our focus is 3D. Yeah?
I just had an experience with a hidden object game.
Yep.
And from our research, women demographic doesn't like any innovation in health games. It has to be straight off. Otherwise, if you try to put some quest elements, they turn away. You see it in your sales, and unfortunately, it doesn't work if you try to merge a hidden object and classic adventure in any way.
I think you're right. I think that the core mechanic, you know, people are trained to it, they like it, give them what they like, you know. So that when they're in that play zone, then you better not go and disrupt them from that, right? Now, I still believe around the fringes, around the edges, when they're taking a break from it and they're recharging, you can go and have an opportunity to do that. So, by the way, the same is in slot machine games. You know, don't go and distract the slot, right? Slots are predominantly female gamers. They're in the zone, don't go and confuse them. I think there's a reason why Zynga slots didn't do so well, because it was too confusing, it broke you out of the zone. It had like a slot at the bottom and it had a little RPG running kind of like progress thing at the top, and it just didn't really work. So I agree with you on that core kind of loop. Yep. So here's another example. This is actually, you may know Christine. So she's pretty out there in the industry. And she's, you know, I was asking her about this, and she's like, I play casual games obsessively. You know, I really love cakes. I love cakes, looking at cakes. I love eating cakes and making cakes. So I finished Bakery Story. You know, she finished the whole game because she really loves the art and the style, and it kind of corresponds to that. But she didn't play it in a very casual way. She planned it all out and decided what she's going to, you know, put down, what jobs to start, when to come back and collect the cakes and so forth. So that's an example of the art, you know, is very appealing, and then that kind of drives the usage as well. Because essentially, Bakery Story is similar to Restaurant Story and Fashion Story, and it's kind of similar mechanics, but the art is, obviously, the theme is very different. Here's a game. This is an interesting one. This is like a pretty mid-core game, you know, Caban, a lot of, you know, high-end strategy, guilds, collaboration. Dragons of Atlantis is like over 40% female players. But it's kind of a very similar game to some of the other Caban games, which are not easy to get into. And I think part of the reason is because the art and the fantasy environment, that particular style is appealing to women. And so that's why you get a usage. But it's interesting, and I was talking to some friends at Caban, the behavior is different. It's more about collaborative work, like, hey, we as a guild, and I've forgotten what they call the guilds in that game, but we as the guild are working together. It isn't so much for kind of individual glory in that game. And this is a kind of funny one. They have their dragon armor, and it's very, very nice and pink there. It's kind of funny, and it doesn't really work for me, but maybe it works for the users. And speaking of pink, it doesn't have to be pink, so don't get into the thing thinking like, hey, if I want to make a game for women, it has to be pink only. No, it doesn't. Women love dark, you know, gritty, kind of like crime-themed things. You know, they love lots of different styles of genres, so there is no kind of like stereotype that is the only thing.
Now, is that something that is country-specific, or that is across the board? Because just if you look at
you
Yep.
know, TV shows, movies, and sort of that's become, you know, there's a higher number of women who kind of like the whole crime thing where in the U.S. Now, is that the same in other cultures?
It varies country. It's a great question. I think it varies country by country. I recently kind of spent some time in Japan kind of understanding the market, and that market is much more homogeneous, and it's much more like kawaii, and you get some variations within that, but it tends to be that, whereas it's everything, you know. And you know, I used to run a virtual world before, and we'd get everything from really dark, kind of like underground, very heavy goth styles through to you know, fashionista, glamourista, you know, pretty in pink sort of thing. So I think it depends on the market, but there's no one size, at least for the US, there's no one size fits all when it comes to style. Yep.
When I was living in the Philippines, they have a lot of drama shows. They like the drama shows.
Yep.
And one of the big themes is kind of like the underlying like criminal case, underlying criminal activity in the thing.
Right.
So I think a lot of places are starting to get in, because I don't think crime shows showed up in the US until like mid-90s, late 90s.
Right.
So now that there's so many of them here, I think it's just a matter of time before they kind of populate throughout the world.
Yeah, great. And also,
I think it's mostly about the drama though.
yeah, it's the drama. There's a lot of like interesting things that happen, and it's similar to a lot of the hidden object games do well, kind of following a similar sort of construct as well. And they did a really good social integration as well as part of that. Okay, number 4 is collection. So collection, and I kind of grouped in customization. They're probably separate, but I just put them in. They're both starting to see. Collection is really important. If you think about it, Pinterest is basically a collection game. You know, it's a game of going and scouring around, and eventually, oh, I discovered something great. I'm going to pin that. I collect it. I go somewhere else and I pin it. It is like a an Easter egg hunting game. You know, go and look around, look around, look around. Yes, I got a great egg. So you know, this ties in really well with the nurturing. If you have collection plus nurturing plus story plus relationships, it gets really, really strong. And you express yourself through that. So this is actually Christina. Christina is our creative lead in Frenzoo, my company. And she's pretty hardcore. She plays everything from Star Wars Galaxies, MMOs, all the way through to World and you know, Stardom. And Dragon Veil. And so, for example, I really love Pixel People. The world and characters were really cute, and I had this desire to collect all the different people. I spent a lot of money, and when I collected all of them, I stopped playing. Happy. So it's a collection game for her. She really enjoyed the collection element. And other successful games for women, like Midcore games, like, for example, Campus Life, at its heart, that's a collection game. You want to collect all of the different girls. You want to collect all of the different collections. And I think that's very strong. Now, it doesn't mean that guys don't like collecting. Of course we do. We like collecting, you know, sets and things like that. But I think it's stronger with them. Let's talk about competition. So back to the kind of the theme before. I think that direct competition doesn't really work. It's stressful. It's stressful to go and say, hey, why is someone attacking me? And you know, do I have to attack someone? I don't want to attack someone. Don't force me to. You know. And I'll come back to that theme in a second. And if you think about it, okay, think about the games on the playground, like just at an early age. You don't see spontaneous basketball games between girls just starting up, right? You know, they have to be, team sports tend to be organized. Why? Because it's very stressful for, you know, having to go and like make decisions that affect, you know, social relationships. It's extremely stressful to go and like just organize a game of teams. You know, who's on my team? How will she feel about if she's not on my team? Things like that. I mean, they care much more about those sort of things, whereas guys will be like, yeah, I just want to play, yeah, I want to go on the team. So you don't really see that on the playground, and I think that kind of follows through as well. So the competition, now does that mean women aren't competitive? No, absolutely not. You know, many women like to compete, but many times they like to compete indirectly. So when we're game designers, think about what ways we can compete indirectly. It may be through a third party. I have this kind of crazy game idea. I don't show it. But anyway, you're competing through, like, indirectly through something else.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, sure. So let's take a different one, which is Zumba, right? Zumba is this kind of classic, and I was explained by a friend of mine, but it's this classic kind of compete and cooperate in a social environment where you have the Zumba and everyone's having fun and doing the dancing and things. but then you do get a pecking order, right? You get the people who are at the front of the class and they want to block the mirrors a little bit. They wouldn't ever directly attack someone, but they may go and block the mirrors and have some indirect ways to compete. And I think that, and if you want to compete against someone or bring someone down, you don't do it directly. You go and do it through third parties and you kind of engineer that. So, by the way, speak up if you think if you don't agree, but I think direct competition doesn't work. It doesn't resonate as much.
How can you
as
take the
indirect.
stress out of competition?
Sorry, say again?
How can you take the stress out of competition?
You take the stress out by minimizing the impact on you. So if someone competes against you, maybe you lose something. You need to sink resources out of the game, right? But maybe you gain something else back. So it's like you take away with one hand, but you give something different with the other hand. It's like some really smart slot games. Oh, you lost, but you gained something else. That's one way to take the sting out of losing. And on the other side, you don't attack directly. You kind of do something else which has the effect of sinking someone else's resources out of the system.